What's up guys, welcome to part 2 of the Making Your First Game in Unreal series. In our last video, I showed you guys the very basics of installing and using Unreal Engine. In this video though, we're going to take the third-person character template and turn it into a side scroller. So if you skipped the last part because you already knew some of the basics of Unreal, go ahead into your Unreal Engine tab here, click New Project, make a third-person character, give it a name, and hit create. We didn't mess with any other settings other than this. Once you do that, you will be caught up. Otherwise, if you were following along, you should already have your project. And we kind of messed up the level a little bit in the last part because we were moving some stuff around. But in this part, we are going to learn how to turn this character that can move around all 3 directions freely into a simple side scroller cube. I want to give you guys as blank of a slate as possible, so we're just going to be running off a cube. We're going to replace this character and get them locked to that 2D axis. So let's go ahead and dive into our first ever blueprint. The first thing we're gonna wanna do is open up our third-person character blueprint. For those of you that are new, a blueprint is something that has components and code tied to it. So our character is going to be a blueprint because we're able to assign code to it. If we open up our content drawer here, you can either navigate to third-person blueprints and then open your third-person character in here, or if you just highlight the content folder and then you type in third, then it's going to bring up your third-person character and you can just double click on it to open it up. So now we're being shown a lot of things, and I want to give a basic overview of what a blueprint is and what it contains before we get into actually changing things around. First off, what is a blueprint? It is something that has components and code. There's a ton of different types of components, and we can see here in this components tab that we have the BP third-person character, which is the actor itself. Once again, an actor is anything that can exist in your level, anything that you can drag into your level is an actor. And then this actor has a few different components. We have our capsule component, which is just our player collision. We have this arrow component, which just tells us like what direction is forward. This is more for debugging. Then we have our mesh component. So this is a type skeletal mesh. In here, we can just swap out our character if we want to. Unreal comes with some default characters. Oh my gosh, that one does not have the right animations assigned. Then we have our camera boom, which is basically our arm that binds our camera to our character. And then we have a camera component, which is what we're actually seeing the game through. All of these components have a ton of details and settings, but then once we go to the bottom here, there's this character movement component as well. This is what actually enables our character to be able to move around. So if you notice here, if we click on our event graph, which is where all of our code is kind of handled, there's not that much going on here. And if we double click on some of these things, we can see, okay, there's a little bit more going on, but this is really only a few nodes. And I'll circle back to nodes, but this character movement component is basically this preset thing made by Epic that enables character movement. So a component enables extra functionality within your blueprints. And these can be as simple as adding some extra collision to containing all of the code that allows your character to move around. If you've come from Unity, you know that their code is very component based, where you make components that enable functionality. In this case, we have the character movement component, and if we click add, there's all sorts of different types of components that can add extra functionality to your character. Once again, that functionality can be anything from collision to adding a light to your character. Like if we put this here and we make it green, and I click OK, and then I go and I press play, you can see there's this green light that's now attached to our player. So if you're trying to do a headlamp or something on your character that has an actual light, then you can just add a light component to your character. But definitely it can be fun to just open this add tab and play around with what you can add. Now our viewport tab is where you can actually look around at what these components are doing. So I just clicked up here on viewport, and then I can click on these things very freely, but there's a couple more tabs in here, one of which being the construction script. This one's probably one of the lesser used ones for newer developers, but it's important to know what it does. This lets us run code before we're actually playing the game. So it basically runs code before the object is ever initialized. So this could be to run some code before your enemy is spawned in game, so that as soon as you spawn it in, everything in this construction script happens first. Or it can be to actually do things in your editor. And I'm just going to show a quick example, and you guys don't need to follow along. But I'm just going to set the material of my character to something else. I'm just gonna make it this blue, and I'm putting this in the construction script. And now when I drag a character in, look at that. Our character is blue. So if you need to do anything before the game is actually running, that can be done in the construction script. Then you have your event graph. This is kind of the control panel for your blueprint. This is where you're calling all of your different functions and events and such. And then you can have multiple graphs for different types of things when you're categorizing things out, but we're just going to have this one event graph for now. And there's a ton of other tabs in here that I'll talk about later on, but I think that's all you guys need to know at a surface level right now. So now, how does programming in Unreal actually work? As you can see, we have nodes. In other game engines, you're going to be coding things line by line a lot of the times, more traditional programming, but in Unreal, we do blueprinting, which is blueprint node-based coding. It's a form of visual scripting, and fundamentally, it's the same as normal programming. It just looks different and is a lot more visual. So basically what happens is you have different events that trigger, and then code that happens with them. But before we can do any of that, you guys need to know how to move around, like how I am right now. And to do that, you're just going to hold right click and drag, and that'll let you move around. And then you can use your scroll wheel to zoom in and out. Take a second. If you've never worked in one of these before, drag around, learn to do that, zoom in and out, and then you're good to go. So let's take a look at one of these events. These events are always going to be red. Nodes are kind of color-coded to help you with that visual aspect of visual scripting. A node that's red like this is going to be an event. So we have our enhanced input action look, and that is feeding into an aim function. Now, before we get too complicated here, one thing that I think is very important to know, this white line is our execute path. Every single node you add is going to be triggered by this white line in the order that the white line is getting to those nodes. So if I had another node between here that's connected by a white line, then that node is going to get called before aim. So I'll give an example. You can spawn in a node by right clicking, and I'm just going to grab a print string, which just gives me a debug message in the console. If I want to know that this node is getting fired, I can hook up these white execute path lines, and this print string is always going to call before this aim function. So that's a fundamental concept to know, especially if you're coming from a more traditional scripting background. This is just basically a new line of code in a way. This is connecting to the next line of code, just like how your code is line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This execute path is basically just saying, do this thing next. Then anything else you're plugging into a node is some type of variable. I'll get more into that in a few minutes, but it's super important to know how this execute path works. So right now we need to do a little bit to change our character to make it actually work in a side scroller format. Right now, we are not bound to a 2D plane, and we're able to look around freely, and we need to strip a lot of this functionality down. We want the player to be locked side to side, and we don't want this mouse movement. We want that traditional side scroller format. So I'm gonna help you guys out a little bit here. You can see that we have these events that are hooked up in here. We're gonna wanna unhook some of these. So all of these look events right here, so we've got IA look, event secondary thumbstick, IA mouse look. These are how you look with a mouse, how you look with a controller, and how you look on mobile, I believe. We can just go ahead and click and drag to select all of these and delete these. Then this is a comment. This is just a way of documenting out your code. I'll get more into that in the future. I'm going to delete this as well. So we basically got the exact same character now, but now if I'm moving my mouse left to right, I'm not able to look around at all. So that's one step closer to setting up a side scroller. Next up, we're going to go back into our character here. And what I'm gonna wanna do is I'm going to wanna go into our character movement component. And there's a ton of settings in here, but if we go to this search tab in our details, I can look up plane. And in here, there's this constrain to plane checkbox. What we're trying to do right now is lock the player to where they can only move left and right. So if I click this constrain to plane checkbox on, I can lock them to any axis or specify a specific axis. So if I click the x-axis here, I can't move forward and backwards. I'm pressing W and S right now, but only A and D are working. Now we already are almost to a side scroller, right? That's almost working, but you'll notice one problem is I can still move diagonally. It won't let me move diagonally, which is kind of strange. And then I'm still able to move forward and backward to turn around, which is something that you probably don't want. So to fix this, we're going to open up our third person character blueprint again, go into our event graph, into our movement input, and then you'll see this IA move and then event primary thumbstick. This is for mobile, so I'm just going to select these and delete it because I'm not making a mobile game. So we're just going to keep this IA move, which is how our movement is working for anything on a computer. So that can be keyboard and mouse, as well as our controller. So this is basically just an event that's set up with Unreal's input system already that's telling us if a key is pressed down and how much it's pressed down. And we need to strip some functionality away from this to get it to where we can only move left and right. And to do that, I'm just going to double click on this blue node. This is a function, so this is a collection of code. I'm going to double click on it, and you can see that they have very kindly commented this out. So we have our left and right, and then we have our forward and backward. And it's literally telling us what these nodes are doing. So once again, we don't want forward to backward movement. So if I just hold Alt and then click to disconnect this execution path, and then I hit compile, which you don't actually have to hit compile here. And then I hit play. Look at this. I can move left and right, and I can still jump and everything, but I can't move forward and backwards. So now we have the movement for our side scroller character set up. But there's still a couple other things I wanna do to kind of set up the foundations for this project. And so we're gonna go back into our blueprint here. When we go into our viewport here, I don't wanna worry about having to teach you guys all sorts of complicated animation logic right now. That's something that I plan to do later. And so to simplify this down, we're going to add a component to this blueprint. Once again, a component is just something that is attached to this blueprint, and I'm going to add a static mesh component. I could click that, or I can click on cube here. And so we are just going to have a side scroller where you play as a cube. And in the same way that we can move stuff around in a level, we can move it around in our blueprint here. And because it is below our capsule component, it is a child, is the specific terminology of our capsule component. And you can see that from these arrows down here. This means that wherever this capsule moves, which is essentially wherever our character is moving, our cube is going to move. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to align this cube with our character. And I'm gonna make it a bit smaller just by scaling it, like I showed in the last video. And I'm just going to try and align this thing the best I can. And I kind of like that size for the cube. I just want to make sure that it is as close as I can get to that capsule collision with sizing. So I'm just going to check the bounds of that collision and then move it up. Get it nice and level there. And then the last thing I want to do is just go ahead and hide this character. And I can do that by clicking on the skeletal mesh component here. And then you'll see this skeletal mesh asset, and we can just click clear. And that's just basically saying we don't want a animated character in here. So now we have a cube. Boom. Simple as that. So we've now swapped out our character for this cube, and then you guys can add whatever you want here later on. And if you notice that your cube is floating a little bit like mine is, then I can just go in here. I probably need to move it down. Yep, I missed a little bit of space there. So I'll select my cube, drag it down, and then hit play again, and now it's just hovering right above the ground. One other little fun quirk about this cube though right now is it is like turning like a real person would. And so there's a way to disable that. Right now it's inheriting the rotation, so it is rotating with this capsule component. So it's really this capsule that's rotating around. The same way that our cube is moving left and right wherever this capsule is moving, it's also turning with it. But we can make our rotation independent by clicking on this cube, and then under the transform tab, if we hit rotation and then select world and then hit compile, now its rotation is independent. So it's still going to move and scale with its parent, which is the capsule, but now it's going to rotate however it is told to rotate versus how its parent is telling it to rotate. So now we have a cube that's moving left and right. One of the last things that I want to do here for our initial character setup is with the camera, because I feel like this camera is a bit too close, right? This is not going to lead to a fun side scroller experience because we can't see a ton of things that are going on. And so I'm going to go in here to our blueprint and grab this camera boom component, and you'll see that it has a target arm length. I'm going to crank that to like 1200, hit compile, press play. Maybe that's a bit too far now, but you can see that that changed how far our camera is away from the character. So you can see it in the viewport here. As we change this value, our camera is just attached to the end of this boom arm. So maybe I try like 800 and then hit compile, and now things are looking a lot better. Then what we can also do with this camera boom, right now, I'm not a huge fan of how like in the center our character is, because a lot of what we're seeing is just what's underneath the character, which isn't too relevant. So I'm going to go back into the viewport and just grab the camera boom here and move it up a bit. That way our character is more in that like bottom third of the screen. And then I'm going to take it one more step. And so now our character is more at the bottom of the screen. And one thing you'll notice here, which might be a little bit different from a lot of side scrollers that you've seen, it kind of feels off. It's kind of weird having that ground so close up to the camera, and how it feels like we're looking at the character almost from a top-down perspective. Like it kind of feels like our camera's up here and it's tilted down towards the character. But that's not the case at all. That's actually our field of view. What we can do, if we want to get rid of this effect altogether, is we can switch it to orthographic. This is a camera without any depth at all. This is going to make it look very two-dimensional. That's not exactly what I want, but you can see that there is just no perspective at all now. It literally is making our 3D game look 2D. What we probably want to do instead is hit this back to perspective. So I'm going into my camera and I'm clicking perspective, and I'm going to change this to a lower value. Like we'll try 30, and you can see it's a bit more flat. Maybe that's still a bit much. Maybe we'll try 60, because I still want a little bit of that perspective feel to make it feel 3D. And now it's feeling a lot more flat, a lot less in perspective. And then the last thing I'll do is just keep on adjusting my camera, move it down a bit from where it was earlier. And then as you decrease your FOV, things are gonna feel closer. So we can probably switch back to that 1200 number, but play around with this and get it to feel right for your character. I'm just messing with the camera boom arm length as well as the FOV settings right now, but this is definitely feeling a lot better in my opinion. If you wanna match my settings directly, I have the target arm length at 1200, and then if I click on my camera, I've got it on perspective mode at 60 FOV, 60 degrees field of view. And so already we have the basics for a side scroller set up. So this is going to be the core for our entire side scroll game. We basically took this third person character that can move around, look around and move around in 3 dimensions. locked it to a single plane so that it can only move left and right. We unhooked some logic for letting the character be able to look around. Then we got rid of that forward-backward input on the character so that they can only move left and right to get rid of those weird diagonals we were seeing. And then lastly, we just messed with our camera to get it into the right position for this game. In the next part, we're going to create our actual level that we're gonna play in. So we're gonna move some things around and just try and make this look generally better to give ourselves a better sort of sandbox to play around in. If I missed anything at all, or if you got confused at all, please comment down below. In all of these videos, I'm going to have a pinned comment that is giving additional information for if things changed in Unreal, or if I just forgot to tell you guys anything, because I'm not perfect, I'm a human. So let me know if you were confused at all, and I'm going to add that stuff to that pinned comment. And if you're still feeling confused about some of the stuff we did in the blueprint, don't worry. I was deliberately being a little bit brief in this one because I don't want to overload you with every single thing about blueprinting in Unreal. That's going to come later when we start to add things like moving platforms, obstacles, UI, things like that. Right now, you should not feel super competent in your blueprinting skills. We literally just disconnected some stuff and that's it. Anywho, like I said, in our next episode, we're making our level. So if you're not in the playlist yet, you can click right here. And if that next part isn't out yet, be sure to hit subscribe. That way you don't miss it when it comes out. Anywho, I hope you guys enjoyed and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.